listener production.
Hey, welcome to this episode of The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Have you been impacted by the recent egg shortages across Australia? Coles and Woolies in particular have been hit hard by limited supplies, and a new bird flu outbreak in Victoria this week has sparked a warning that those shortages could persist a while yet. This all comes as experts report a rise in the number of us choosing to own our own chickens. First reported during the pandemic as people looked to take control of their food supply when supermarket shelves were often bare of a lot of essentials. The keeping of backyard chooks used to be almost common practice in Australia, whether you lived near a big city or in the regions. But the practice saw a big drop-off in the 1970s and 80s before this recent resurgence. And now chickens are the fourth most popular pet in Australia behind dogs, cats and fish. Despite their increasing popularity, very little research has been done that looks into how we view our backyard chooks and whether we consider them pets, a commodity, or a bit of both. A new study out of the University of Adelaide has changed that though and found there is actually a lot to learn about what our love of chickens says about us. Dr Emily Buddle conducted that research and she joins me now. Tell us, what was it about the COVID pandemic that prompted more Australians to keep chickens in their backyard?
Yeah, for sure, Sacha. So I think people were really motivated to go and buy their own chickens and have them in the backyard for two main reasons. I think one was really driven by supermarket shortages, wanting that fresh supply of food, particularly something like eggs. They're so versatile, nutritious and all those sorts of things, but also partially a bit of that companionship. We know broadly that people spoke about the rise of dog ownership for that companionship, particularly when people were working from home and those sorts of things. But I also think chickens fall in that category as well. So not only were they looking for that constant fresh food supply, but they're also interested in having that companionship from another species, particularly when you couldn't get it from humans during lockdowns.
So what sort of people are owning backyard chooks in 2024? Is there like a profile we can rely on, or is it all different sorts of people?
There's no one profile of people that are keeping backyard chickens. For sure, our research shows that people that have families are certainly motivated to keep chickens, partially because of that constant fresh food supply to feed the whole family, but also because people liked the opportunity to teach their kids about pet ownership and chickens being quite accessible animals to raise and easy to keep at home, but also to teach their kids where food comes from, so that food supply. Eggs come from chickens in the backyard, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know the other benefits of owning backyard chooks. We've talked about like food security, we've talked about the aspect of a cheap food source as well, and, you know, the benefit of being able to teach kids. But what other benefits are we getting from actually having these animals in our backyards?
Yeah, people certainly spoke about the companionship aspects. They really liked having chickens in the backyard, providing an opportunity to recycle those food scraps that are coming from the kitchen and in turn getting those eggs back. But also our participants spoke about the opportunity for connection with, say, neighbours or friends and family to provide those extra eggs, because a lot of the time participants spoke about the fact that these chickens produced more eggs than what they can consume in their own household. So they were able to connect with other people around provision of eggs from their chickens.
That's really interesting too. Do we know much about our relationship with these chickens? I know that sounds like a strange question, but, you know, has much research been done before now about how we view them and, you know, the benefits that we feel we're reaping? Like, is it a beneficial relationship from both sides? What do we know? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about the research that we've done is it gives us an interesting insight into our human-animal relations in general. I think that in every sort of culture, the way in which we view animals differs based on how we're brought up, our religion, social standing, all of those sorts of things. And so people are really motivated by keeping different animals, and their perceptions of those animals are motivated by different things. With chickens, we found something that was really interesting. Is that they kind of fall between this really weird liminal space between livestock and pet. Yes, they're seen as pets. They were given each individual names. Our participants described the unique personalities that each of these birds had, but they didn't quite fall into a pet category like a dog or a cat. At the same time, they were providing food, and so they were kind of seen as this livestock species through this provision of food. And the reason that we talk about that liminal space is because they weren't necessarily afforded similar or the same level of care, say, that a dog or cat would receive relative, but they were still providing that food source. So they kind of, bit in between.
It's complicated is the answer. If we had a Facebook status, it's complicated. So I guess that then the next question is, are we taking good enough care of our chickens if we're not quite viewing them through the same lens as we do with a cat or a dog?
It's a very interesting question, and our research participants spoke about the fact that although they love their chooks and they were definitely seen as pets, they wouldn't take them to the vet. And so this raises some concerns about animal welfare and animal health in that if those animals do fall sick and they're not getting the veterinary care or attention, are they actually suffering without getting that attention? So it raises interesting questions that we love them as our pets, but not enough to take them to the vet as we would with, say, a cat or a dog.
And what risk does that then pose from a biosecurity perspective? We had recently bird flu outbreaks in a number of farms in Victoria, New South Wales, WA and Queensland, I believe, were also affected by these outbreaks, which saw millions of birds euthanised. Could we see that risk flow on to backyard chickens? Is there a way that those diseases can transmit that way?
I guess the concern when it comes to biosecurity is the fact that with birds, as soon as it gets into a wild bird population, it can be transmitted anywhere. And a lot of these backyard chooks are free ranging, so do have contact with wild birds either through, poop or direct contact. And so it does raise that concern that if these animals do fall ill and they're not being seen to by either a veterinary professional or, say the government officials, that we can't actually get a diagnosis of what has caused that illness. And then there's the risk of that then being transmitted back to the wild bird populations and then transmitted more broadly into our production birds, chickens, turkeys, and all the rest of it. So it does raise those biosecurity risks for sure.
I'm curious to know the way we used to treat dogs, for example. There's always the old adage that, they got scraps off the table, they ran around without leashes, they never got walks, they were just kind of part of the furniture. They were around, but we didn't treat them how we do today. And as a dog owner, I can definitely say that my dog eats better than I do half the time. So I'm curious as to whether there's this idea that perhaps our relationship with chickens will evolve just like it did with dogs, where if we continue to see an increase in ownership and an increase in the value that's placed on chickens, not only as a commodity by providing eggs and that sort of thing, but also companionship, people naming them and accepting them into their lives. Do you think we could see our relationship with chickens evolve past is complicated?
I think that we're already seeing our relationship with a variety of livestock species changing. So the increasing research in animal welfare science around animal sentience and those sorts of research domains are certainly showing and changing our attitudes to animals. With regards to food, we're also seeing changes in ethical food consumption and dietary choices around becoming a vegetarian or vegan because we don't necessarily want to eat animals or animal products. So I think perhaps we will see that shift more broadly. It remains the question as to whether those that are still happy to eat eggs or even chicken meat will bridge into sort of walking their chickens around on a leash or putting them in cute little costumes. I'm not sure, but, I'm yet to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, watch this space. Now, the study, it's worth noting the study size was fairly small for this initial one. Are you going to look to do future research on this? What else are you looking to learn in this space?
Yeah, so typically in qualitative research, because our research was interviews with these participants, what we do is we interview people up until the point of saturation, which means that we hear no new themes coming out of the research. So this smaller sample size is actually quite typical of this kind of research. I think what we would look to do in the future is actually repeat the study to see if there's shifts in attitudes towards chickens or other animals in general, particularly in the context of ethical food choices and consumption, which is what our research group's really interested in.
Dr Emily Buddle, thank you so much for talking to us today. Such an interesting and, an unexplored area, I think, of our relationship with animals and those that provide us food but can also be great pets. Thanks so much.
No worries. It's been great. Thanks.
Dr Emily Buddle from the University of Adelaide speaking with me there. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our other content, don't forget we are on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you then.
Listener.